Ooh, okay. Yeah, so Sarah is one of my favorite people in the world, and I'm really thrilled that she could be here tonight. And of course, it is late for both of us, but not usually for me, but I'm in the East Coast right now. And yeah, we've known each other since 2018, and I've always been so impressed with her because she does so much for the community, and more specifically, especially for trans folks. So she has a private practice. She's also a social worker, so we're cool. And but we've done training sessions together for helping providers to be LGBTQ plus affirming. We've even co-authored uh I'll call it a book together on
Hmm.
that. So Sarah knows a lot about this, and that's why I couldn't think of a more perfect person to tackle this topic. That said, I'm gonna hop off camera and video now and let you do your thing. But yeah, oh, and I'll sneakily also just say that we finally got to meet each other in person super recently, and lovely human. Just so thrilled I
Aw.
had the opportunity to do that. So yeah, needed to get all that in there. All right. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm really honored to be able to talk to your amazing group tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and start to share my slides here. Really, training, educating is definitely a huge passion of mine. So, of course, I was thrilled when Charlie reached out to me to speak to this fantastic group and to hopefully provide some really relevant, actionable information. I'm really passionate about not just being a therapist, but also enhancing capacity for fellow providers, family members, loved ones, allies of the LGBTQ community to best support people in the community. And so I'm just really excited about this topic. And my hope is that it gives you some helpful things to think about. And I'm hoping that, like I said, this is useful information that you can start kind of implementing or share and pass along with other people who might benefit from this right away. So thanks for the warm welcome. Again, my name is Sarah Gilbert. My pronouns are she, her, and her. A therapist in Connecticut. And tonight I'm going to be talking about finding an LGBTQ affirming therapist. I have been a therapist in private practice now for a decade, but I've been doing this work in nonprofit work for years before that. So I can say that both in my nonprofit work and in my private practice experience, I know that this is an ongoing concern, especially for parents and family members of LGBTQ youth. It can feel really a lot more challenging than it should to find a mental health provider that is really affirming and competent in working with this very particular population in a way that's compassionate. And so I'm hoping this is helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments at the end because I'm really interested in making this useful and applicable to you. So I want to start off this conversation by just acknowledging that for anybody, for any reason, finding a mental health provider is often a very anxiety provoking and overwhelming experience. It can feel kind of scary to think about talking to a total stranger about some deeply vulnerable personal issues. So I just want to name that because I think that's important to acknowledge the anxiety and the doubts and the overwhelm that can come in the process. And so if you are a parent or caregiver of or loved one of anybody who's trying to help someone find an LGBTQ affirming provider, I think the best place to start is getting some clarity on what exactly is what therapy is going to be helping with, right? If you're trying to help your child with connecting with a mental health provider, what is it that you and your child identifies as the need, right? We don't want to make the assumption that just because a youth is LGBTQ identified, that in and of itself is problematic, right? But we want to be affirming and saying, hey, I know that this awareness about your identity and the act of disclosure or interacting with different family members might be stressful. So, we want to try to help find a therapist who can support the youth with how to deal with relationships, how to deal with things at school, right? So, getting a clear idea on why it is we're seeking out therapy, I would say, is the very first step. And obviously, how this is navigated really depends on the age of the LGBTQ youth, right? So, let's say we're talking about a teenager, someone who's 16 or 17. That youth is going to be way more able to articulate their specific needs and concerns and preferences than, say, someone who is 5 or 6 years old, right? So either way, whether it's just you as the parent or caregiver really doing all the work of advocating for your child, or you're working collaboratively and maybe the older child is taking more of a lead in that communication, I would say just really starting with an idea of what it is you're looking for. As a therapist, when I'm working with people, when they're calling me, reaching out for support, that is my number one, my very first question, right? After I say, obviously, thank you so much for reaching out to me. What is it that you're looking for help with, right? Because therapy, um, the goal of therapy is to help facilitate some sort of change, right? And so for us as a therapist, what's really helpful is having a starting sense of where it is you would like things to go once therapy is completed. And of course, those needs and those wants can change over time, but at least having a starting point is really helpful. And the other thing I want to say as we're kind of starting off tonight's conversation is to really remind you, whether you are a parent or a loved one, a significant other, a caregiver, it's really important to always be aware that it is your right. And I would say it's a really important responsibility to do your homework, right? To make the effort to really check out different providers that you're considering. Some people take the approach of, well, I'm just kind of looking to see who is in network with my insurance because I have to use my network benefits. And that certainly makes sense to try to find someone in network, but I would really encourage you to do a little more work than that so that you're making sure that this therapy experience is as positive as possible, right? As I mentioned earlier, just looking for a therapist can really bring up a lot of anxiety and vulnerability. And so what we want to do is try to do the legwork to do our research proactively to try to increase the chances that this will be a successful experience. I also want to really let folks know here, and maybe I'm reminding you, maybe this is something you already know, that it's perfectly fine for you to call or email several different providers, have discussions with several different people to really get an idea of who would be the best fit for either you or your youth who's looking for support. Obviously, therapeutic interventions are important and identified treatment goals are important, but also a very meaningful component of the therapy experience is relational fit, right? I myself am a very active therapist. I will ask questions, I will offer reflections. And so somebody is calling me, for example, saying, what really helps me is to just have somebody listen and not say too much. Um, I might not be the best fit, right? Because there's that personality piece as well. So, doing your homework, taking the time to make sure that you're really kind of seeing what all your options are is something I would highly recommend. So, we've got that clarified, and now we're looking at starting the search for a therapist. And 9 times out of 10, people really feel kind of overwhelmed and daunted by this process. So I want to give you some things to think about, some tangible things to hopefully help it be a productive experience and not an overwhelming one. So before we actually communicate directly with a mental health provider, we're looking at how they're marketing themselves, right? This is how we find out about who's in our area or, what therapists are available for us to work with, right? So we are going to be mindful as we're looking up different therapists. We want to be mindful about their marketing. How is it, for example, that they are communicating about themselves and their practices and things like online directories, right? Like the most popular one that a lot of people are familiar with nationwide is psychologytoday.com. So if that's the site that you're looking at, you want to read through the profile that the particular therapist has there, right? Because we're writing those bios, those profiles to really hopefully capture who it is that we work with and what our skills and experiences are. Other online directories include Therapy Den. There's also Mental Health Match. There's OpenPath. There's quite a few, but I just listed kind of the two most common ones here on this slide. So you want to kind of do some reading, right? Look and see how they're describing the work they do. See if there's a link to their website. That's something that a lot of providers I know do, specifically in psychology today. They'll have a link to their website if they have one. And that's also something worth looking at. Looking at their website, how do they describe the work that they do? What sort of information can you gather about the scope of their experience? What if they have a particular therapeutic orientation, right? Things like that. And we're also looking at, depending on your circumstances, you may be also thinking about how therapy providers, whether it's individual or group practice, how are they marketing themselves within your local community, right? If there's certain community events where people have a table at, let's say, like a pride event or a community event, what sort of information can you gather? Are you able to talk directly, right? Thinking about the community example, if you're seeing people at a table at an event, that gives you an opportunity to talk with the therapist there or the group practice owner to get some further information about the work they do and the experience they have. And so when we're looking at marketing, we want to be specifically looking for a few things. I would really recommend that you are looking over marketing material, whatever form that takes, with an eye to looking at what information do they share about their experience. And it's entirely up to you what those priorities are, right? Like you may, for example, look for providers with a certain number of years in the field. You may look for providers who have certain certifications or credentials. And you may also be looking for providers who disclose that they have certain identities, right? Now, obviously, this is a very individual choice for providers, but I know for a lot of folks, it can be really helpful to connect with a therapist, a mental health provider who discloses if they are themselves part of the LGBTQ community. And for some people, that's not as important, but I just want to point that out that if that is something that's relevant and important for you, then that's something that you want to be looking for in their marketing. Um, and inclusivity and how what I mean by that when I put that on this slide is are you seeing any language that tells you that they're not just kind of checking off the boxes of, yeah, I work with the LGBTQ community, or yes, I'm LGBTQ allied, but is the language and the way they're describing the experiences, the problems that clients have and the solutions they offer, is that language signaling to you that they really are inclusive, that it's not just a matter of, well, I'm saying this so that I can get more clients, right? So just kind of taking a critical eye and looking at all of that to figure out what sort of information you can find out about a mental health provider before you actually meet face to face or talk in a consultation call. Um, I also want to mention that you may be looking at images, right? Images are usually a very vital part of marketing. So, looking at what pictures are included in this person's online directory. Are they sharing images or language to let you know that they have certain features in their office that might make you and or your LGBTQ child feel more welcome and included in their space? Um, is there any links to any videos that they've done, like let's say on Instagram or YouTube, where you can kind of watch a video and get a feel for their personality style and their therapeutic approach to see if that feels like a good fit? And also looking at language and terminology, right? Whether that is in their marketing or the intake paperwork that you fill out, just having an eye on what sort of language am I seeing here? Am I noticing that there are certain phrases that are outdated or offensive? Right, that's also something to be mindful of. So these are all the things that I would say is really helpful in starting your search before you meet with a provider, before you have it, narrowed down to one or two or three people that you want to actually reach out to. A lot can be communicated through marketing alone. So I can't tell you, sadly, how many times I have myself, I have reached out for looking for a referral for a therapist to, let's say, work with a transgender client, and this individual who's reached out to me is looking for therapy, but they are not in network with an insurance. I'm sorry, I am not in network with an insurance that they have. And so when I have reached out to other colleagues to say, hey, I'm looking for, a provider with, I don't know, United Insurance and somebody who is a transgender teenager looking for support. And I've had colleagues say, oh, yeah, 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 I have openings. I'm happy to support this person. I will do my due diligence and look at their website or their Psychology Today profile. And if I see language there that does speak to their experience with this population and mentions that and kind of speaks to the experiences that clients are having, then that feels really good to me. Whereas more often than not, unfortunately, when I have looked at websites or Psychology Today profiles, I'm not seeing any language there or any imagery that suggests that they specifically work with the LGBTQ population. And when that's the case, I'm not comfortable making that referral because you're saying you're open to seeing new clients, but you're not communicating that in your marketing. So just wanted to kind of highlight for me as a therapist, kind of in this process, what that looks like sometimes. And so after we've done some research, we've kind of looked at the marketing, we've got an idea of a handful of people or maybe even just one person that we feel like, yeah, I want to see if this person's the right fit. The next step is a consultation call. Um, I would say easily 99% of therapists do provide a complimentary consultation call. The standard is usually, anywhere from like a 15 to 20-minute call where you're able to engage in a conversation before there's a commitment to work together in therapy. And I cannot emphasize how important this is. This is a beautiful opportunity for you to communicate about yourself, your family, and your child, and what the needs are. It is really, really helpful to get a sense right off the bat of how communication is going to go moving forward if you decide to work with this therapist. And so sometimes people have this perception that, well, if I make this consultation call, really we're just talking the logistics of what are this person's hours, what's their availability, and what insurance did they take. And while that's all important information, of course, I would really encourage you to utilize a consultation call for far more than that. Have a list of questions handy. Have some thoughts about what's important to you. What are you hoping to get out of this conversation with a therapist? What sort of things are you looking for in terms of forming an impression of them? It is an opportunity for you both to be interviewing each other in a sense that you are sharing what the needs are for your child. If your child is old enough and capable, I really encourage your child to be part of this call as well to ask any sort of questions that they have about the therapy experience or share any concerns. I want to share that too. If obviously, if we're talking about a child who's maybe 5 or 6 years old, that's probably not accessible. But it's really a two-way conversation for you both. And when people are calling me to look for therapy, I'm always saying, this is like a two-way conversation. I'm looking to see if I feel like I'm the right fit for you, because I want to make sure that if it's not me, that I help get you connected to someone who can really provide you the best service. So again, it's a two-way conversation. It's a really important opportunity. Okay, so that's great, Sarah. I do a consultation call, I get some information. That sounds lovely. What the heck do I do with this? What questions do I ask? Well, here's a list of some things to ask or to be thinking about. This doesn't mean you have to ask all of these questions, of course, but here's some questions that might be really helpful in that consultation call. Or also, again, if you are just at the stage of looking at their marketing and trying to determine some information about the therapist, you want to ask about or be looking for marketing information that tells you about this person's experience in working with the LGBTQ population. Are they brand new? Are they right out of grad school? Or are they somebody who's had lots of years and particular training in working with this population? Maybe they have a certain therapeutic approach that you are really looking for. Sometimes people really have a preference of like, hey, I'm really looking for DBT to help my teenager with navigating intense emotions. Okay, that's part of your information gathering, right? You want to be I would say this is really more for a direct consultation, conversation with a therapist of asking about how do they navigate using, your child's name, chosen name versus legal name, right? And this will vary, and I say that asking this question, bringing it up is helpful for 2 reasons. One, I would say if the therapist says, "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" That's a probably a red flag that perhaps this person doesn't have as much experience, especially specifically working with trans or non-binary individuals as you may have first thought. But also, it's an opportunity for the therapist to say, "Oh, yes, I absolutely recognize that that is an important thing to think about. As I'm communicating with your child, I will be using the name that they use. I will be using the pronouns that they use." I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to correctly use people's pronouns, right? So that's part of this conversation too. Asking the therapist, how do you navigate in certain parts of the medical record, you have to indicate my child's legal name, the name that's on the identification and the insurance card. But in conversations with them, are you going to be using the correct name? Are you going to be using the correct pronouns? What pronouns you use in your clinical notes, right? This is all really, really important information to get before you start working together. Sadly, I have heard from a number of clients over the years of clients of different ages, by the way, anywhere from teenagers to adults who say, you know, I was really looking for a therapist that was affirming, and this person said they were affirming. And in the beginning, things seemed good, but I noticed that this therapist kept misgendering me. And it was a problem that kept coming up session after session after session. And so I had to just stop working with that person because it was so harmful to me. That is definitely not something that either you or your child should ever have to deal with. And so getting this information at the outset can really be helpful to make sure that you're finding the right fit. It's also important to find out about a particular therapist. How do they handle privacy in general, right? Of course, in general, we are ethically bound to comply with HIPAA regulations, right? Federal HIPAA regulations. But additionally, when we're talking about working with LGBTQ youth, we want to ask particular questions with an even more heightened sensitivity to privacy. So that might look like, okay, well, my trans teenager, you are knowing this person by this name and this pronoun set. Um, when you go to talk to their medication provider or their school guidance counselor, it's really important to me that you know that my child is not out to their school staff yet, right? So I need to make sure that you are able to handle using their name in session, but when we're communicating with school staff, please don't accidentally out my child, right? And making sure that that's an ongoing conversation too, that the therapist is kept up to date as you continue to work together so that nobody is accidentally being outed or misgendered. That is so vitally important for a child's, really any person's safety in the community, but especially for children who may be interacting with various people in their orbits, right, where they may be out to certain people and not others. I think in general, this last point here is really a good point for anybody looking for a therapist ever for any reason. How does a clinician assess for risk, right? Importantly, how do they make a distinction between a statement that is made in session versus an actual clinical risk of suicidal harm, a suicidal ideation, self harm, things like that, substance use? How what is the therapist's skill level in assessing for that? And especially if we're talking about working with a youth, what are the mechanisms for communication? If there is a concern about my child in therapy with you, how and when do I get notified about that? What's the procedure for, hospitalizing, looking at hospitalizing someone or getting further assessment? Um, I'm sorry there. Looks like I skipped some slides here. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened there. Humaning in progress. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so other questions that are, I think, very important is, kind of going off that last point, what does our involvement in our child's treatment look like? What level of communication is expected or invited as you're working with my child? And again, this is another particular question that can vary based on the age and developmental stage that your child is in. So I would say it's very common if your child is, say, elementary age, anywhere from 6, 7, 8, for you to be part of every session that the child is attending, right? So the therapist will meet with your child and then we'll meet with you probably together as well. Whereas if your child is a teenager, it is much more likely that there would be less direct communication with you. Um, and that's something to negotiate with a therapist, right? People have different levels of concern or different preferences with that. So I've certainly worked with teens over the years where the parents say, hey, I respect my child's privacy. I want her to be open to speaking with you. I'm not going to be intrusive, but if there is a risk or concern, that would be where, of course, I'm letting them know, right? If there's any sort of concern that I have about the child's safety, the parents obviously need to be notified. I've also worked with teenagers who are like, yeah, I would love for my parents to be involved in my session. It would be great if maybe every other session they come in for the last 5 or 10 minutes so that we all can kind of work on some family stuff together too. Whatever your preferences are, I think that's really important to communicate to the therapist as you're doing this consultation call to see, what that looks like. How open are they to different arrangements? And specifically to, in general, if you as the parent or caregiver have any questions or concerns, what ways can you communicate with a therapist outside of therapy sessions? Do they want you to email them? Do they want a phone call? These are all helpful things to kind of just think about ahead of time, should that need arise, because often it does. And then looking at a logistical aspect. Now, nowadays, people are doing any combination of telehealth or in-person therapy sessions. Telehealth has been obviously much more popular and widely used in the last few years. But I want to point out a couple things to think about here too. If we're talking with a mental health provider who is offering telehealth services, we want to make sure that in and of itself, that format is something that feels safe and comfortable for the LGBTQ youth, of course, right? If they are doing telehealth sessions, we want to make sure that obviously our child is able to engage in a session in a space where they feel comfortable and can talk with good internet connection and privacy. But we also want to make sure that the therapist is doing things to ensure privacy, and maintaining the sanctity of those sessions, right? I have sadly heard a horror story here in my state where um, a client had shared their experience that the therapist was doing a phone session and they were clearly going through a drive-through as if they were conducting a therapy session with a client, which was understandably pretty distressing to that person. And that would be an example of something that is very much not appropriate. And we want to be checking out with that potential provider we're looking at of, how do you do telehealth sessions? What measures do you take to ensure privacy and my sense of safety in session? And obviously, for meeting with a therapist in person, those things are important as well. And we also want to talk about logistics like, hey, at your office building, do you have gender neutral bathrooms? If that is something that is important for your child, of course. Is your office space located in an area that's safe and welcoming for LGBTQ people? That's also, of course, incredibly important in those looking at those logistics. And so once therapy is started, once we've connected with a therapist, we started working together, it's important to have ongoing evaluation and dialogue. And this doesn't have to be after every single session, but some things that we want to be kind of keeping an eye on and checking in with our child about is looking at least in the early stages of the work together, paying attention to intake documentation, right? That's one of the first clues to you as far as how affirming a provider actually is. How are questions on the intake documents worded? Um, are there opportunities for people to kind of fill in rather than like a very limited multiple choice option, for example? Does the phrasing and the way the questions are formulated signal inclusivity? It's also important to keep in mind that treatment goals should be identified based on your child's needs. It should not be a therapist saying, well, this is what you're supposed to do in therapy, and this is what I see as the important goal. It really should be client driven as far as whatever the specific treatment goals look like. It's also important to just kind of be mindful of how ongoing dialogue is with the therapist. It is, I think, very important to, as a therapist, to be open to ongoing communication, not just about the logistics of scheduling and, cancellation policies and things like that, but ongoing dialogue about how is therapy going? How does the child feel like therapy is going? I regularly will ask for feedback from my clients every few sessions, like, hey, I just want to check in. Do you feel like we're helping you move towards the goals that you have? Does it feel like I misunderstood anything you said, or was there something I totally missed? I want to make sure I get it right. And that's important for parents and caregivers to have that opportunity as well to be able to engage with a therapist and just kind of say, hey, I have this concern or I have this question, and to not be met with defensiveness or hostility, right? I think I very much view my role as a therapist of I'm working with an individual, but that individual is also part of a family system. And my job is to, in whatever way I can, support the entire family system. And so that's exactly why I'm very open to ongoing conversations because to me, that is how therapy can be most effective to evaluate how we're doing, course correct if needed, and then continue to work together until treatment goals are met. And the other thing I just want to say, as far as ongoing kind of evaluation of how therapy is going and conversation about that, is that therapy really should be a space where your child is free to express themselves without any sort of judgment or shaming. And also that your child should not be put in a position to have to educate a therapist about their identities and experiences, right? So, this is where doing some work upfront ahead of time to kind of really check out somebody's competency and experience and skill set, hopefully can prevent this from happening. I've heard numerous horror stories from clients where they were really put in a very uncomfortable position of realizing that they had to spend a lot of time in their therapy session educating their therapist, um, rather than the therapist already having had a frame of reference or doing their own work to get training or consultation. So those are the other things I wanted to speak to about that. So in conclusion, I would say the main two takeaways from today's talk is that therapy with an LGBTQ affirming provider really should feel inclusive, safe, validating, and affirming for the person that's in therapy, right? That is to me the utmost priority. And that getting some clarity, doing a little bit of work upfront to get clarity around a provider's competencies, experiences, style, practice policies, things like that, along with ongoing communication will increase the chances that your child has a positive experience in therapy, and hopefully that you do as well as a family member of somebody who is in therapy, whether it's family therapy or it's just the child and you're having conversation with a therapist. So I hope this was helpful. I thank you so much for being here and listening. I've listed my website here, and feel free to reach out to me if I could be of any help in the future. And with that, I will open it up to any questions or comments.
Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.